Okay, so good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. This is the very first plenary talk as part of the Student Symposium in Combinatorics, which is an online conference for students in combinatorics and related disciplines, supported by Matrix, the Australian Mathematical Society, the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute, and UNSW Sydney. So it is, I'm gonna swap the slides that I'm sharing. Give me a sec. Okay. So I think we thought long and hard about who we wanted to open our conference with, and I thought, who better than Tobin South? So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Tobin South, who is an first-year PhD student at MIT's Media Lab, working under the supervision of Sandy Pentland. Right. So Tobin was born in rural Queensland in Kingaroy, which I believe is the peanut capital of Australia. And I think Jack is from around there as well, one of our organizers. But if you ask him where's home, he'll tell you Adelaide, which is in South Australia. If you're one of the, if you're attending the SSC, the first room for parallel sessions is actually named after Adelaide. These pictures not taken in South Australia. Thought I'd show our SSC attendees what you're unfortunately missing out on, because we're not doing this in person. Tobin did his undergraduate degree at the University of Adelaide, started out in engineering, but one day that changed, and there's a very interesting story around that, which is, I believe, in some podcasts on the internet, and eventually graduated valedictorian with a degree in mathematics and computer science. Then he continued to do his master's at the University of Adelaide as well, working with Matt Rowan and Lewis Mitchell, and that thesis got a Dean's Award. So you know how we all have that one friend who seems like they do everything? For me, that's Tobin. So it's been my life's mission to embarrass Tobin as much as I can. I must say, Tobin, I resisted the urge to put even more embarrassing pictures on these slides. But
doing a pretty good job already, don't worry.
But Tobin is, I could spend more time talking about what Tobin's done than Tobin's going to be talking today. But among the things, many things he's done, he was the president of the Adelaide University Mathematics Society. He founded 2 startups. I don't think he's with them anymore, but he founded 2 startups. And maybe most notably in recent times, Tobin was part of the Bayesian arm of the Australian federal government's efforts in COVID-19 modeling. So we all have Tobin to thank for COVID not being so bad in Australia.
I think you have me to apologize for making it down, more likely. Sorry about that.
So Tobin knows everyone. I actually met Tobin right here at UNSW when UNSW was hosting the AMC Summer School in 2019. So this AMC is one of our sponsors. So here's a little plug that if you're an honors or maybe PhD student in Australia, you might want to consider going to the AMC Summer School. It's 4 weeks of great mathematics, but also you get to meet lots of really cool people like Tobin. And also I picked this photo because it's got Rob Hickenbotham there, who's in the audience somewhere. Hi, Rob. So I just wanted to tell a little anecdote about Tobin. So a few months after we met at the AMC Summer School, I was meant to go on a trip to Adelaide. It was half academic visit, half holiday. And I was talking to Josh Bean, the friend of Tobin's in Adelaide, and telling him about the trip, and said, you know, you're going to be in Adelaide during Tobin's 21st birthday. He's going to have this party, like 21st birthday party at a public park somewhere. Why don't you just rock up unannounced and surprise him? I'm not sure if I'm the best, particularly pleasant surprise for Tobin's 21st, but I did. Everybody knew except Tobin, and I showed up unannounced. But that's not really the point of the anecdote. The thing I wanted to mention was that one of the things that Tobin's best friend Tom said when giving speeches was he said that Tobin has this slogan that he lives by, which is work hard and be nice to people. That's sort of one of the things that I'm hoping to, it really resonated with me. I wrote it down, and it's one of the things I'm hoping that I'm going to be out of my PhD. So I think I've embarrassed Tobin enough, but also bought enough time for people to move from the conference welcome. So it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Tobin, who's going to talk about changing the world with combinatorics, a discussion of applying your skills to cool problems.
Thank you very much, Yudi, for that extremely generous introduction. I feel sufficiently embarrassed. I'm glad that you got all of the worst photos of me to make sure they're included in the slide deck. But I think lots of the comments there about talking to people and collaborating will echo, hopefully, through this talk. So let me screen share. Can everyone see my screen? Give me a thumbs up. Perfect. I'm extremely honored to get a chance to talk to everyone today. I think this is a super cool gathering, and hopefully I can give some interesting comments with regards to collaboration and taking the very cool things that everyone here works on and applying them to really interesting problems. Even writing this talk, I was amazed at all the things that Combinatorics can actually touch. This will be in the interest of collaboration. We will have Adam join us. My Twitter handle is there at the bottom, as is customary in symposiums. Feel free to tweet at me your critiques, or if you have any comments, post them in the chat and Yudi will chime up and interrupt me to mention them if he makes the judgment call that they're worth interrupting. But I welcome open commentary as we're going along. So, changing the world with combinatorics is a pretty big title. Hopefully we can do a small part of it justice. And to do that, we're going to talk about a few things. Firstly, we're going to talk about my journey a little bit in a less fun way, perhaps, than Yudi just described, and where I am. Then we'll talk about a bunch of weird and interesting examples. So we're going to talk about a network analysis Spotify. We're going to have a guest appearance from Adam Hamilton in the spirit of collaboration that I think we should be bringing to this conference to talk about some cool work on Candy Crush and some interesting results. We're going to talk about zero knowledge proofs and Web3, which might get really applied, but very interesting and has some cool pure math implications. And then loop back with some computational governance with relations to AI world dominance. Hopefully it's weird, hopefully it's very fun, and hopefully you learn something. And we'll, at the end, get a summary of why we're talking about this. But actually, I'm going to start by spoiling that, which is the conclusion of this talk is that no matter whether you're a hardcore pure mathematician or an applied mathematician or working in combinatorics or somewhere in between or none of the above, and you don't even work entirely on combinatorics, I am hoping something in this talk will show you an interesting real world problem that you can apply your skills to and find something interesting. So I'm going to take a page out of my old advisor's book, Lewis Mitchell. He always starts his slides with a map of where Adelaide is in the world, because not everyone in the world knows. I think with this group, most people might actually know where Adelaide is from. If you're curious where the peanut farming town where I grew up in, it's somewhere around here. Would strongly recommend. I still have a bad predilection for peanuts. It's dangerous. Don't bring peanut butter near me. As Yudi gave in the introduction, I did my undergrad and my master's there. I am now, that is not what I wanted. I am now over here, up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right next to Boston, Massachusetts, which is where MIT and Harvard are. I'm not actually in MIT right now. The lecture hall I'm in is actually at Columbia in New York. I don't think anyone needs a map of where New York is. And so I'm grateful to be here today to break into a lecture theatre to give this talk. As Yudi mentioned, I don't spend most of my time in the MIT math department. I spend most of my time in something called the MIT Media Lab, which is this anti-disciplinary institute, which is, the point is, I work there and there are several other mathematicians there working on solving problems, but there are also political scientists and engineers and computer scientists. And the whole point is we come together to solve interesting problems. And that kind of exemplifies the spirit of what I want to talk about today. And I just added this to the slides, which is this Matrix PhD research collaboration scheme sounds spectacular. And if you can get free money to travel to another city to work with cool people, I think that is spectacular and would strongly recommend people engage. But let's jump into the actual talk part and get to some fun, interesting math problems. So to start off with, we're going to talk about percolation theory and critical transitions and graph spectrums. But we're not going to do it by jumping into the math. We're going to do it by jumping into data, really. I presume people are familiar with Spotify. It's pretty popular as far as music streaming services go. And it also has some interesting data within it that you can use to analyze. So this started as a research project back actually originally during a summer research scholarship back in it, and it rolled over many years into really cool analysis. And what we did is we collected a network of artists on Spotify by who they collaborated with. So we had 1.2 million nodes in this graph. We've got a network of artists and they are connected by edges which denote where the two artists collaborated, whether they appeared on a song together or did a cover of one another. There's an undirected graph, some kind of interaction. So it could be that Kanye and Taylor Swift worked together. It could be that I took a Mozart song and took a clip of that to part of my rap song, or maybe I did a rendition of said Mozart song. This was collected using snowball sampling by starting at Kanye West. You ask, why Kanye West? Why not Kanye West? We ended up collecting all of the network, and he was just a fun place to start using the API. We also get a bit of metadata about these artists of their popularity. So to get everyone on the same page, we have a graph, this network of Spotify, which essentially at its core is going to come down to an adjacency matrix, just a big matrix showing who has and hasn't worked together to make the analysis particularly interesting. And this is a network diagram over here. So we're talking about data yet. You're like, come on, let's get to something interesting here. So we've got to go through a little bit more data. We've got popularity on these artists. Most artists up here are extremely unpopular, with a few, this is a log scale, being quite popular. So it's a pretty big graph with most of them not being too popular. And we want to find something interesting in this data, right? We're having a play. The whole point is to find something interesting when you're doing in data science statistics things. So we're going to calculate the eigenvector centrality, which just actually means taking the dominant eigenvector of the graph adjacency matrix. So the dominant eigenvector is just the eigenvector that has the largest corresponding eigenvalue. And if we run this, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see that the most central core, right? So the most important core, measure this however you want. If you were to take a random walk on the graph, the most likely place you're going to end up are the classical artists. So this might not be too surprising that if you want to look at musicians that have spread their impact broadly across all of music, Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Chopin are probably good examples of musicians that have had a really big impact. And so this is, just some data analysis. It's kind of cool, kind of fun. But that's actually not the first result I got, because you see, calculating these eigenvalues can be really slow on these 1.2 million sized matrices. So instead, I only took the most popular artists. I filtered it at about 50. But if you take the most popular artists, all of a sudden I discovered that the most central core of that network was suddenly the rappers. Lil Wayne, Kendrick Lamar, Snoop Dogg, Kanye West were the most central core of that popular network. So I thought, okay, this is weird. It kind of makes sense that if you look at popular artists, maybe the rappers are really high impact. But let's look at when this changes over. This is a fun result, but we can go deeper. We're mathematicians, we find interesting things. So if you were to take this network and just chop off nodes with low popularity. So at 10 on this axis, we've taken the full network and thrown out the nodes with a popularity of 10 or less. You'll notice that the centrality, Mozart stays the most popular, most central all the way until this point here, when suddenly everything changes and the rappers become the most central. So again, the geniuses in the audience are probably thinking, okay, there's some singular individual who is the most important to this graph, that if you remove them, it totally changes everything and suddenly the rappers become important. So we're going to test this. We're going to take all of the artists and we're going to remove just the artists in this critical region between 40 and 50 popularity where this transition happened. And we're going to remove them. And what do we find? We find that nothing's going to change in this 40 to 50 range because we removed all of them at the very beginning before doing this filtering. But we've just shifted this transition, this critical transition, to the left a little bit, which means that it's not actually a singular artist that's changing this. The structure of the graph itself is changing, and it's changing all of a sudden, right? Now, if you were a, boring old statistician, I'm not hating on statisticians here. I am one. I have much love for them. You might give up and be like, right, well, this is weird. I can't run any linear regressions on this. Ends up, we need a little combinatorics in there to help us out. So the answer is all in something called the graph spectrum, which is the eigenvalues of the graph. Which is, if we look at kind of the eigenvalue that corresponds to the vector where classical artists are dominant and where rap artists are dominant, we find that these vectors exist the whole time. They just change their ranking within this graph spectrum, right? So one of the eigenvalues starts getting really big as you start filtering things until it becomes the dominant eigenvalue. Because remember, our centrality is only the dominant eigenvalue. And we end up seeing that this shows up even in second and third eigenvectors, that we have all these swapping between these artists. Something really weird is happening in the lower, less important eigenvectors of this graph. Kind of interesting, right? This is an old story that I've given a talk on before, and I brought it up because this was research I did when I started as an undergraduate and into the beginning of an MPhil, and it got published towards the end of that master's. And it's an interesting example of where the data can't take you the whole way. You've got to draw from interesting lessons in the rest of math, especially bits of pure math, even bits of percolation theory, a bit of graph spectrums. And just to convince you that this is a worthwhile thing, if anyone is ever teaching a course with eigenvectors, I strongly recommend sending this paper to all of the students, the $25 billion eigenvector, which is about Google's search ranking algorithms. And even at Spotify, these ranking algorithms are like vitally useful. And the research we do, the math we do, can actually be useful to the world. But that is a fun example, I think, of something interesting related to the world. So let's go to an equally fun presentation. In the spirit of collaboration, I would like to invite Adam Hamilton from the University of Adelaide to do an interlude about Candy Crush, of all things. Adam is finishing up his PhD and is an absolutely fantastic and interesting character that you should totally talk to throughout this conference. So Adam, take it away and give us a bit of a spiel.
Thank you. This is a talk about the mathematics of Candy Crush. This was a topic that I wrote my honours thesis about, and it's now been my claim to fame that I am the second best Candy Crush based mathematician in Australia and the fourth best Candy Crush based mathematician worldwide. So my problem is quite combinatorial in nature. It's just saying, how many ways can we set up a Candy Crush grid? Candy Crush is played on a square grid. Each grid contains a candy, and each candy can take one of up to 6 colors. And so I'm trying to answer the question, how many ways can we assign those colors to the candies such that there are no 3 consecutive candies in any row or column having the same color? Because, next slide, please. As part of the game, if you ever have 3 consecutive candies of the same color in any row or column, they're going to disappear. So this problem turns out to actually be a special case of a more general problem called evaluating the weak chromatic polynomial of a hypergraph. And already because of that, there's now so much wealth of combinatorial knowledge to draw upon. So the first thing that came up in my research was this result by Mark Jerram and et al., which says that efficient approximate uniform sampling and efficient approximate coloring, from a computational complexity perspective, they're actually the same or very similar problems. If you can approximately uniformly sample something, you can approximately count it. And if you can approximately count it, you can approximately uniformly sample it. So the problem of just counting the number of colorings has now been reduced to just the problem of being able to uniformly sample from them. No later on, one very important result that I ended up using quite a lot in my thesis is called the Lovász local lemma, named after Laszlo Lovász, who recently won the Abel Prize. And that's a theorem which relates to the existence of solutions to constraint satisfaction problems. How it works generally is that we can view each constraint as being a random variable. It can either happen or it can't. And now if all the constraints were to be statistically independent, if the probability of one happening didn't affect the probability of the other happening, then it's entirely possible that all the constraints could be satisfied. But unfortunately, the real world is not that neat. In my case, the blocks of 3 in Candy Crush do intersect each other, and there is this dependency structure throughout the entire system. So what the Lovász local lemma says is that, okay, you've got these random constraints. Now, what if instead of being all independent, they were only dependent on at most D other constraints in your constraint satisfaction problem? And furthermore, if the probability of each constraint being satisfied can be upper bounded by this number P, then if this equation shown on the slide here holds, then a solution to your constraint satisfaction problem does exist. And, oh, sorry, next slide, please. So this is all very well and good. However, the Lovász local lemma by itself doesn't actually give us everything we want. First of all, the output isn't always uniformly distributed. I was able to show in my thesis that in the very specific case of Candy Crush, the output is uniformly distributed, so that's great. And the second is that it's a non-constructive proof. The Lovász local lemma will tell us that a Candy Crush grid will exist, but it's not going to tell us how to find or construct it. Now that's where the Moser-Tardos algorithm comes in. This is a Las Vegas algorithm, which means it runs in a random amount of time and will produce a solution to the constraint satisfaction problem, in our case, a Candy Crush grid, in expected linear time if the solution to the CSP is guaranteed to exist using the Lovász local lemma. So now my problem, in order to approximately count, I have to approximately uniformly sample, and in order to efficiently approximately uniformly sample, I have to show that the Lovász local lemma implies a Candy Crush grid can exist. And this can be, and plugging the relevant numbers into the equations, you can find that if there are 7 or more colors in your Candy Crush grid, then a solution does exist and everything's great. So next slide, please. And sort of the main contribution of my work was by offering what I believe to be a slight improvement on the old-fashioned Glober dynamics. Now that's a Monte Carlo algorithm, which will begin with a stable grid and translate it into another stable grid. And then there's a Moser-Tardos algorithm, which begins with an unstable grid and randomly transforms it into a stable grid. Now the Glober dynamics will run in time n squared log n when c is greater than or equal to 6, and the Moser-Tardos algorithm can run in ON time, which is quite useful. And so by taking the Moser-Tardos algorithm, which is this non-constructive result which is based on this non-constructive result in pure mathematics, I was able to actually get a very nice applied result that I'm able to shave off a factor of n log n from my algorithm. And next slide, please. And that's the main takeaway of this talk. For those who are actually more curious on how the Lovász local lemma and graph colorings work, I've included the names of a couple of speakers at this conference. Please check them out. Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you, Adam, for that interlude about Candy Crush. For those who have pulled out their phone and begun playing Candy Crush, please come back to the fore. I know it is very tempting when that game is on your phone. And to reiterate that point, I think there's a really cool example of what Adam's done, where he's taken kind of proper pure math work and applied it to a really interesting applied context. Thank you for pinning me. Thank you. I want everyone to see my face. Maybe the fun of Candy Crush or Spotify isn't serious enough. We want to do something even more interesting and impactful. Let's go really applied. Now, I don't mean really applied in the applied math sense. We can still pull in our pure mathematicians here. And we can pull in some really pure stuff here, but I want to talk stuff that can really impact the world. I want a reminder that everyone in this audience right now can actually do seriously super cool stuff. So we're going to talk about Bitcoin. Now, we're not really going to talk about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's cancelled. I don't want to talk about Bitcoin. What I want to talk to you about is some math, but unfortunately, this whole cryptocurrency thing involves a lot of math. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to be talked about. So this is not me suggesting you buy Bitcoin. Let's not interpret it as that. What it is a great way to do math and lose money. Cryptocurrencies have so many interesting parts to them with attack robustness analysis, anti-money laundering, fraud detection, super cool math in there, and zero knowledge proofs, which is actually what we're going to talk about today. I pulled a paper off Archive in Combinatorics looking at that. And this is on the right here, the network graph of co-citation, citation graph of the Combinatorics cryptocurrency community. Now, to everyone in the audience, I know many of us are students. If you've not heard of connected papers and you take one thing away from this talk, connected papers on the internet, just Google connected papers. You put in any paper and it will show you the citation graph. It is the best thing for literature reviews since sliced bread. If you take nothing away, I think that will be a useful thing for your life. Now, we're going to talk about zero knowledge proofs. Just so that everyone's on the same page, I want to give a super quick introduction. Let's say Adam, I want to tell Adam that I have the answer to a math textbook question, but I don't want to tell him my answer. But Adam needs to know whether or not my answer is correct, or whether we agree. Now, there's a simple case of this where I share a hash of my answer, which just means I take my number and I do some weird equation to it that only works in one direction. It's a many to one map. So we can see kind of, if you do this at scale, that he doesn't know which of the many it came from of the answers, but he knows we get to the same one, right? That's a simple hash. There's a broader version of these zero knowledge proofs, which have to do with stuff like Yau's millionaires problem, which is if the two millionaires in the audience, Udi and Thomas, are interested in knowing which one of them is richer without revealing their actual wealth. And so they play this game where they share information to figure out which one actually has more wealth without actually telling each other how much they have. And there's some really cool math behind it. But that's the idea of zero knowledge proofs. You want to transmit information without revealing the original information. Just know that things are correct. So why do we care about this? Bitcoin, it gets a lot of headlines. Ethereum, maybe less so. You might have heard of it, you might not have. It is the second largest cryptocurrency. If you're curious as to how these work from kind of a cool math perspective, please watch the 3 Blue 1 Brown video. He is 1,000 times cooler than I ever will be, and will give a much better explanation of how this works. But suffice it to say that there are these blocks with hashes in them. Now, Bitcoin's a cryptocurrency. It's just money. You have all these transactions. Bob pays Alice, right? Adam pays Tobin. But Ethereum has something called the Ethereum Virtual Machine, the EVM. Now, this network can essentially execute arbitrary code, right? You have a global computer that you can write code into these transactions in, some fancy JavaScript or whatever, and it will run that code, right? Thousands of people around the world will run that code. At a high level, this is how NFTs and all these Web3 things work, whether you've heard of DeFi or these games and things. They all work by having code run on these global blockchains. Now, you guys know maybe how, writing some MATLAB code goes. It's pretty trash when we write code. And you can imagine if you wrote code and sent it to the entire world to run, that's a lot of work, a lot of people doing stuff with your code. And so you have to pay a fee. That's how these cryptocurrencies work. And in Ethereum, this distributed computing is getting really expensive. So this is the transaction fee of using Ethereum to do something. And you notice it's sitting at like $40 US, $20 US to do pretty much anything, which is kind of wild. So to make this a bit more concrete, I looked to try and register a domain for this conference using the .eth extension. And to register it for 1 year, the period that it might be useful, it costs a tiny bit of ETH, 0.003 ETH. And the gas fees, this transaction fee of running the global compute to tell everyone to register this domain for us, costs almost 4 times more than the fee for the actual website, right? The transaction fee. So this is the gas fee down there, the transaction fee, and this is just the raw fee of a 1-year registration. Now, maybe you're thinking websites, that's a bit weird. I want something fun. So hopefully everyone remembers the Dumb Ways to Die campaign by Melbourne Metro. They put out 10,000 beans as NFTs. This is bean number 7,192 that a real human being has purchased with $126. They now own this JPEG that I have copy pasted into this slide. In order to buy this, they spent $26 just in transaction fees to have this global computer run stuff. So I don't know if the $126 was worth it, but they burnt $26 in the process to get these things done. So maybe there's a solution to this, and there is. It's called zero knowledge rollups. Now, instead of doing all the work on the main blockchain, you have all these side blockchains that do a bunch of work and then submit zero knowledge proofs to the main chain, right? This might seem a little bit confusing, but it's pretty much what we described earlier with the millionaires problem. That I do the work and I want to prove to you that I have done the work correctly. I do play this game, share the information, and anyone on the main chain can check that we've got the same result, right? And so everyone kind of verifies using these zero knowledge rollups. And in case you think this is not particularly relevant to the world, there is a total of about $5 billion of so-called value lock, which is people trying to run this compute with these zero knowledge rollups. But the fun part, the reason that made me think of doing this is one of the leaders of the Ethereum movement was like, we need to do some more proofs about these zero knowledge rollups. Like there was an active call for mathematicians to make this more robust, this $5 billion problem. So I thought it was a good example of like weird places that you might not expect your combinatorics to be very useful, but it turns out it really is. So I can tell everyone's like, oh no, too much cryptocurrency. We need a break. We need something more relaxing, right? Okay, let's move to kind of something that doesn't matter as much. Let's talk about democracy. You know, not particularly important, especially futuristic democracy, the future of democracy. Now, you might be thinking, I'm here, unluckily, in the United States of America, however much you want to feel about how free or not free this country is. But we have, I think it's a great country. You just give me a look. The democracy is not actually as settled of an idea as you might think. There's a whole field called social choice theory. And I want to start with kind of the reasons why this might be important, and then we'll get to some math, which is there's an idea that we might be living in the most important century where we're inventing critical technologies that affect society for centuries to come. Some random blokes wrote a constitution like 300 years ago, and now it is debated over constantly in most of the societies in the world, like the US and Australia. And so the stuff we write down matters, and they take a long time to change. But importantly, there's also new ways of voting that we're going to talk about in a second, which you might find are kind of interesting and weird and have some weird math to do with them. So the point being that this is not a solved field. Now, there is one good result from back in the day that you might have even heard of, maybe around election time, Arrow's impossibility theorem, which, and forgive me for reading this thing that I've stolen from Wikipedia, no ranked voting electoral system can convert the ranked preferences, so essentially that ballot that you write on, of individuals into a community-wide, complete and transitive ranking, while also meeting a specified set of criteria: unrestricted domain, non-dictatorship, Pareto efficiency, and independence of irrelevant alternatives. Now, what this theorem essentially says is that no matter how hard you try, with the best possible voting system, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. There is no single round voting system that is perfect, that gives you everything you could possibly want, as far as a way to vote goes. I think Australia's got it pretty good, but New Zealand and others have some cool solutions. Now, Arrow won, I believe, the Nobel Prize in economics for that theorem. It's no Fields Medal, but it's not bad, all things considered. But this does not mean it is the be all and end all. So Arrow's theorem only applies to single choice voting. What if you have multiple rounds of voting? There's a bunch of additional math on if you have multiple rounds of voting. And there are even weirder things. So the internet has lots of new technologically mediated voting systems, which are popping up day by day. New ones using this quadratic voting happened only in the last month. Like, this is rapidly happening with lots of money behind it. And quadratic voting is the idea that there are multiple initiatives that you can vote on. So maybe we want to vote that Udi is made Prime Minister of Australia. And we simultaneously want to vote that Tobin is sent to Iceland as two voting options. You might not care about whether or not Tobin goes to Iceland, but you really care if Udi becomes Prime Minister of Australia. So you can cast more votes towards Udi's initiative. But each time you cast an additional vote, so one vote takes $1 or one of your votes, but to vote twice for Udi being Prime Minister, it would take 4 votes. And to vote 3 times for Udi and keep ignoring Tobin, you would have to vote 9 points. So there's an additional cost that scales quadratically as you really overinvest in a given initiative. And this has really nice effects where if you really care about something, you can really invest yourself, or you can spread yourself broadly. Or maybe you just don't care and you want to embrace liquid democracy, which kind of brings us back to some fun graph theory. So this is the idea that you delegate your vote to someone else. So in this picture, A delegates their vote to B. So E just votes. E just makes a decision, I want to vote for this. Here, A says, I trust what B is going to do. B says, I trust what G is going to do. And G says, I trust what D is going to do. So when D casts their vote, they get 4 votes to their name because people have delegated the power of that voting to them. Now, you can imagine in a world of mis or disinformation that this might have interesting effects. And you're thinking this is crazy, hypothetical. I implore you that this is actually being done in a lot of computational voting systems, not necessarily for democracy, but for stuff like school voting systems or online voting systems, stuff like interesting Reddit votes or these DAOs on the internet and Web3. And I stole that figure from a paper that came out a few months ago, doing combinatorics work, studying social choice theory, studying liquid democracy. So this is an area where you can do real stuff that's actually super interesting and impacts the world. But, and this is going to come back to our conclusion, you're going to need to work with cool people to apply combinatorics to solve interesting problems. There are so many cool people in this Zoom call right now who are amazing to collaborate with, whether they're pure mathematicians and you're an applied mathematician to work at some intersection, or reach out to other interesting people. If you want to, you can tackle really cool problems with combinatorics or whatever skill set you have. And I would nudge you to say that the best way to do that is through interesting collaborations, and maybe even invite another speaker into your various Zoom calls. That is the conclusion of my talk. Hopefully you take away some lessons from that and it is useful to wherever else you go and whatever else you learn in this conference. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Tobin. Let's all give Tobin a virtual round of applause, which we can see.
Thank you to Adam as well. And to you for that brilliant introduction.
Awesome. I'm glad you're sufficiently embarrassed. Okay, any questions for Tobin or for Adam? There have been 2 questions that came into the Q&A feature. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do so by using the Q&A feature in the on the bottom of your Zoom, or maybe it's at the top. Right, so there was a question that was answered during the talk. I think Rob Hickenbotham has a question for Adam. Adam, do you want to just answer the question live? I should read out the question. I guess I should read out the question first.
Yes, certainly.
There has been a new pure math technique known as Rosenfield counting, or exponentially many hypergraph counting, that has applied to problems where previously only the Lovász-Kolka lemma has been used. So are you aware of this new technique, and do you know if it has applications towards Candy Crush or any similar problems?
And the answer is no, I've not heard of this. Actually, I'd be keen to learn more. Thanks for bringing it to my attention.
Yeah. Rob, you got someone to talk to later on. Any other questions?
I'm gonna shout out. That's a great example of people coming together to solve interesting problems. Make the collaborations happen.
Yeah. And just reminding Rob that Adam is also in Australia, so you can apply for the collaboration fund. Anyway, any other questions from the audience? So, Jody's got another question for Adam as well. You say that you're the second best Candy Crush playing mathematician in Australia. Who's the first? I wanted to ask that too, actually.
Yes.
I assure you, it's very much not me. That's for sure.
Yes. Well, you're not in Australia. So I'm just going to try and find the book. Could you put the camera on, please?
Yeah.
Thanks. So the top mathematician is Professor Toby Walsh from the University of New South Wales. I'm going by the fact that he's the best because his paper on Candy Crush was published in the collection Best Mathematical Writings of 2015, which I've got here. He shows that the optimization problem of Candy Crush is NP-hard. And given that my paper never made it to the Best Mathematical Writings of 2018, I concede victory.
Nice UNSW connection there. Mark Denker has a question. Do you have a graph of the non-normalized eigenvalues for the Spotify network? I guess this is for Tobin.
Mark, that is a fantastic question. I sadly don't have the bonus slides that I usually have when I give that talk. But you do find that they slide down in interesting ways. You'll also find if you play around with PageRank that is actually doing some kind of, the dampening on that produces a sum of the dominant eigenvalues semi-weighted by, so the sum of the eigenvectors weighted by their eigenvalues. It's super, super interesting. And I would have to point you to the paper on it. But if you want to talk after, email me or message me in Discord. Great question.
Rock Higginbotham just gave us a link to the an archive paper for the results that he was talking about earlier. Any more questions? We've got plenty of time for questions. Tobin did a very good job keeping to time. I should have.
I tried. It's always a random number how long a given talk lasts.
Give people a chance for still typing because it takes a while.
Yeah, feel free to type away. Other questions can always be shooted to me emails. If you find yourself in the US, I know there's even some people in the Discord I saw introductions who are from the US. If you're in Boston, please reach out and we will grab a coffee and chat. I'm a big believer in collaborations and connecting people up. And if you end up in Boston for whatever reason, I will find some cool people for you to chat to while you're there.
But actually, I actually sort of have a question. Sort of, when you sort of approach these applied problems, how do you go about finding out what part of combinatorics or what part of pure maths you need to go and solve the problem? Because I don't think it's obvious unless you've just told us like this.
I think that is a brilliant question, Yudi, which is, I mean, put shortly, how do you ever know what the hell to do? I mean, how do you do any of our research? And the first answer is you ask your advisor, because what are advisors for if not asking random questions to them? And the second answer, which I would implore, is I'm a terrible pure mathematician. I'm sorry, I have to admit it. I'm really quite bad, but I'm lucky enough to know a few really good pure mathematicians, which means when I know that I'm, I think, oh, this might be a combinatorics problem, you can reach out to someone working in pure mathematics and ask them for some pointers, and maybe they'll point you to a paper and you read it and you go back to them and talk to them some more, and maybe you pull a collaboration. In lots of other fields of science, you can have papers with really big co-author sets when it starts getting applied, because you've got to bring in lots of different brains to solve problems. Good question.
Sartak has asked, what's a fairly good way of getting started on social choice theory as an undergrad?
It's a great question, because there are lots of fields which are brand new, and that's really exciting. People have been trying to figure out how to vote for a very, very, very long time. And I would not recommend starting with the ancient Greeks. It's going to get really dry by the time you get to the latest papers on the archive. So it can kind of be daunting as to where to start. The best trick is probably to find someone that is working on an interesting problem. Do a Google of fun social choice theory. Look through the Wikipedia, find some recent papers, be like, oh, who's interesting? And just reach out and be like, hey, I'd love to know more about this. Can you send some resources? And if you can find no one on that Wikipedia page, reach out to me and I will send some cool things to read or questions to start asking about. And, you know, the hardest part of research is just getting started on an idea, getting that momentum built up. And the only way to do that is lots of Googling and lots of sending Discord messages and emails. This is the currency of knowledge.
Okay. Angus asked if someone wanted to start learning about the kinds of network analysis you use to study things like the Spotify networks, what would you suggest looking up? So
I will tell you my journey of how I did that. I came at it a bit as a data angle because I started when I was an undergraduate and I was kind of getting interested in data. And then I had these interesting graphs of this critical transition, and my advisor told me exactly the story I said. They said, oh, there's clearly just some key node that's being removed, like obviously. And so I was like, I'll prove them wrong. And I removed it and proved them wrong, and we had some thing. And then my advisor, Matthew Rowan, leaned back and he goes, he strokes his beard and he goes, this has some relationships to percolation theory. And I was like, and I wrote down percolation theory on my little notebook, and then I went and Googled it later. Because I did not come in knowing much about critical transitions in the slightest. To do the cool stuff like that, I honestly think just having a play with fun problems that started because I discovered I could download Spotify data. Doing a course is always interesting because it's a way to nudge you to stay engaged with that topic. If you can do a graph theory course or a network analysis course. I am sure AMSI Summer School will have something related to network analysis that's cool for those in undergrad. I'm sure somewhere at some part of the math department, there will be a network analysis subject, and that might open some interesting questions that are fun to explore.
Okay. I wanted to, because I sort of know your work reasonably well, Tobin, I wanted to sort of prod about something I was surprised you didn't talk about, which was your work on Marvel, Marvel, not collaboration, what's the word?
You can write papers on any kind of weird thing, and one of my favorite is on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we essentially, this was 3 mathematicians, one of whom watched way too much Marvel movies and had sat down and annotated who had talked to who in the Marvel movies to create these networks of interactions of Marvel movie characters and to see who was in Marvel movies and what time. And then we took a bit of math that had come from ecological modeling ecosystem. Pure mathematicians had done some math and had worked with ecologists to understand diversity in ecosystems. And then we had taken this and applied it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so I have appeared, well, my work has appeared in a comic book website, and I think I've made it. And I like Jack's comment, it's only a waste of time if you don't get a paper out of it. I would argue that that was so much fun that it wouldn't be a waste of time even if I didn't get a paper out of it. I mean, watching the Marvel Cinematic Universe isn't exactly the least fun thing to do. I could do that a few more times. But yeah, I mean, that's a great example of a totally weird project that just came out of nowhere that used some really interesting connections between maths.
Yeah, and there, I know there's another podcast where Matt talks about this project, so you can go check that out. It's
yeah, I believe that's on the ASEMS, the Australian Centre for Excellence in Mathematics and Statistics podcast series that has been done.
Any more questions from the audience? We've still got plenty of time.
Check it out, or else we can give a moment for people to go get drinks. I know to all of the Australians who have woken up bright and early for this, I am deeply grateful, especially to all of the organisers who have gotten up at some ridiculous hour to get everything set up.
Yes, indeed. All right. If there are no other questions, I hope Adam and Tobin will hang around a little bit in other parts of the conference. I know they're very busy people, but I'm sure we'll see them around. Let's give Tobin and Adam a big, massive round of applause. I'll do the audible one, and we can see lots of emojis down there. So we thank you everyone who's not registered for the whole conference for coming. This, once again, the Student Symposium in Combinatorics is part of the PhD Student Symposiums supported by Matrix, and this symposium is also supported by the Australian Mathematical Society, the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute, and UNSW Sydney. If you please come and join us. If Tobin has stimulated your interest enough, we've got 10 more plenaries to go across the week, and they're open to anyone. You don't have to be a student. And also we've got some panel discussions at the end of the week, which I'm sure will be really interesting as well. So thanks once again. And for the SSC participants, we've got a break until for the next half an hour and a bit. And then we get into our first session of contributor talks. All right. Thanks everyone. See you around.
Thank you very much for attending. Enjoy your coffees and/or teas and/or maybe putting on pants, depending on how you're living your Zoom life. Thank you all for attending.